What is better, the Moon or Mars? Where should we first build a base, on our wonderful nearest neighbor or on the fascinating red planet? If you would ask Elon Musk, the answer would be pretty obvious. We should of course first build a base on Mars. And indeed, Mars makes a lot of sense in some regards. It has a similar duration of day and night cycle as the Earth, with a full day being just 37 minutes longer than on Earth. It has a similar axial tilt as the Earth, thus there are seasons on Mars. It has an atmosphere with even wind and dust storms. It has polar caps. Then it has frozen water ice below the surface. It even looks much more like the Earth on the surface, with some landscapes reminding us of canyons in Arizona or Utah. And it is probably more exciting, since it was very likely wet and life-friendly in the past, and some forms of primitive life might have even developed there billions of years ago. So Mars is definitely a fascinating planet which we absolutely must explore. And so Elon Musk created the company SpaceX, which from the very beginning had the goal of creating a self-sustaining colony on Mars. Indeed, Elon Musk seemed to be obsessed and fascinated by Mars from the very beginning, focusing all his efforts on the colonization of the red planet. And who can blame him? Because it is indeed a fascinating planet for the aforementioned and many more reasons. But what if I told you that Elon Musk should really start loving the Moon more than Mars? Now, why would I say that? Why would I say such a thing? Don't I like Mars as much as the next person? Actually, like probably all people who are interested in human spaceflight, I am deeply fascinated by Mars. As I said, it is much more similar to Earth in many regards, and beside the previously mentioned similarities, it also has a twice as high surface gravity as the Moon, which is certainly better for combating the adverse effects of bone and muscle loss in a low-gravity environment. Then Mars's thin atmosphere also offers better protection from solar and cosmic radiation, especially in areas of residual magnetism, of which Mars does indeed have a few. These are areas where there are residues of a previously existing magnetic field that was much stronger in Mars's early history, and these do offer some protection against highly energetic particles from space. So we see there are many reasons why Mars is an excellent choice for a human settlement. And regarding planets in our solar system, we don't have many alternatives anyways. Mercury and Venus are too hot, and the outer gas giants are really much further out than Mars. So planet-wise, it really is the only logical choice for future bases. And yet still, I say that we should first concentrate on the Moon. Blasphemy! Now, why would I say such an outrageous thing? Well, there is one giant and very obvious reason. The Moon is much nearer to Earth than Mars. The Moon has an average distance to Earth of 384,000 kilometers or 239,000 miles. Mars, on the other hand, has an average distance to Earth of 225 million kilometers or 140 million miles. Mars is therefore, on average, almost 600 times further away from Earth than the Moon. Therefore, travel times to and from Mars are a lot longer, and also communication times as well. Hence, if we would build a base on Mars without first having gathered more expertise of living on another world, and something goes wrong there, a rescue would be possible only once every 2 years. Yes, you can launch to Mars only once every 2 years, but to the Moon you can launch whenever you want. So should something go wrong on Mars, help would be very far off, and the astronauts there would be on their own for a long time until help would arrive. This of course wouldn't be so on the Moon. Our nearest neighbor is only 2 or 3 days of travel time away from us, and thus help would be there very fast should anything go wrong on a lunar colony. Then of course, communication with the moon is possible with minimal delay. Light needs only a bit more than a second to travel the distance from Earth to the moon. But from Earth to Mars, the communication time can vary from 3 minutes to 22 minutes, one way. Because that is how long light actually needs to travel the distance to Mars or back from Mars. So in the worst case, when Mars is furthest away, a communication would be really slow. You would have to wait 44 minutes for a reply. And let's be real here, okay? We humans have only had experience of living on another world for a very brief and short amount of time during the Apollo missions. 12 men have walked on the moon in total, and that was a long time ago, the last time in 1972. We have barely had any experience of living on another celestial body, and we have no experience whatsoever of living there for extended periods of time. Think of it like this. If you would have been to the gym a few times many years ago and you did a bit of bench pressing, then if you would start again today after a very long pause, would you immediately aim for the highest possible weight? Wouldn't you first practice a bit with lower weights, warm up with a lower difficulty? The analogy is similar here. Since we have no experience whatsoever of living on another world for extended periods of time, because remember, during Apollo we didn't have moon bases, okay? These 12 people have only spent very brief amounts of time on the moon. The moon would offer the perfect environment to gather that experience so that we can later safely build bases on Mars with all the experience that we gathered of living on the moon for extended periods of time. We would learn how to protect against space radiation, we would know how to overcome bone and muscle loss, we would know how to behave in critical situations if things should go wrong, we would have a playbook from our moon bases that we could employ on Mars. But the moon has other advantages as well. We could mine metals and minerals on the moon and send them back to Earth, which would have real implications and benefits for life on Earth. Something which would be almost impossible to do from Mars. We could even possibly mine helium-3 on the moon, a form of helium which one day might find use in fusion reactors. We could mine a lot of things on the moon and with a mass driver just shoot them into orbit and then transport them super cheaply back to Earth. Also, the moon is highly interesting as well. There are lava tubes that might offer the perfect spot in order to build moon bases, which then would be protected from radiation. Geologically, the moon is extremely interesting because we could learn more about how the Earth itself formed. Then we could do radio and optical astronomy on the moon because it has no atmosphere, and because of the low gravity we could build very large telescopes in order to study the universe in ways that weren't possible before. And once we have mastered the moon, we then could turn our gaze to Mars. We start at a lower difficulty and then increase the difficulty. Also, let's not forget that China has announced that not only are they going to land taikonauts, that is, the Chinese version of astronauts, on the moon by 2029 or 2030, but nay, they are also going to build a moon base there in the 2030s. Now you might rightfully say, wait, what am I complaining about? NASA is after all working on the Artemis program, right? So the US is returning to the moon. Yes, that might be true, but the Artemis program in its current state is, in my opinion, I'm sorry to say this, a sorry excuse for a moon exploration program. NASA just doesn't have the budget to build large moon bases, and the current plan would foresee a relatively small base on the moon by the 2030s. And the whole approach with a dedicated lunar Starship lander and flying astronauts not on a Starship but by a separate SLS rocket and an Orion capsule is extremely cumbersome and inefficient. If NASA would continue like this, there's a very high chance that the Chinese would gain the high ground on the moon. And Obi-Wan taught us a long time ago that having the high ground is a very good idea. That is why Elon Musk should, in my opinion, start loving the moon a bit more, okay? He can still love Mars, but just learn to love the moon more. Mars isn't going away. But focusing the resources on the moon first would allow SpaceX to build a more effective strategy of building moon bases, not the slow and cumbersome and expensive NASA approach. Starship is entirely reusable and it could be modified just slightly in order to allow manned missions to happen to the moon directly with Starship without SLS even being necessary. But it wouldn't even take Starship, since a Falcon Heavy already has enough payload capacity that if it would get rated to launch humans, we could already start building moon bases right now with existing technology. SpaceX would have a huge advantage. It would be the first mover and build a base and even start mining on the moon and thus build up a real economy which would bring in real growth and revenue. SpaceX could be on the forefront of building up a lunar economy and lunar space tourism, which will be huge in the future and even outpace the Chinese. Starships could be used as moon bases in and of themselves. That's how large they are. And so SpaceX would have an incredible advantage. And with all the knowledge and experience gathered on the moon, we could then colonize Mars much safer than before. And of course, the moon colony would continue to exist as well. So we'd have 2 inhabited worlds outside of Earth. But it appears that Elon Musk thinks we can have both at once, that NASA will do the moon while he can focus on Mars. This would be normally a good idea if NASA wouldn't be a slow and bureaucratic government agency. And hence, there is a real possibility that the Chinese will have the high ground on the moon and not NASA. And aiming directly for Mars, in my opinion, will be very dangerous without having had previous long-term moon living experience. So Elon, please stop worrying so much about Mars and start loving the moon. I hope you enjoyed my rambling at least somewhat. I know many won't agree with my opinion, but that's fine, we are on YouTube here after all. But if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, because we'll continue putting out lots of videos on the future manned exploration of the moon, Mars, and the solar system. And please consider supporting us on Patreon or via a YouTube membership, because that would allow us to make more and better videos. All the best wherever you are, and see you next time.